So good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for Capital Caring Health's Center for Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging's first Family Caregiver Support Summit. The holidays are here. Who cares? Practical ways caregivers can survive the holiday. Are you a caregiver that dreads the holiday season? Or are you a caregiver that loves the holidays? No matter which caregiver you are, the holidays can be really intense. Tonight, our amazing panelists will offer real and relevant conversation on practical ways to survive the holidays. We know that this time of year can bring about mixed emotions for many people, no matter how you feel, and you're not alone. You may laugh, you may cry, but you will leave this space empowered with real-time resources that you can use for the holiday and beyond. First up are two phenomenal women who will share a poetic expression about the holiday season, exploring the two sides of caregiving. We have Reverend Carey and Miss Donna Gills. Reverend Carey has worked to improve quality of life for the DMV residents for over 30 years through her service at the Pennsylvania Avenue Baptist Church, where her husband, Reverend Dr. Kendrick Carey, is the pastor. In addition to ministering to the community, Reverend Karen provides communication services for clients, ranging from small nonprofits to federal agencies. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, she launched her own comedic inspirational program, the First Ladies Show. Spirit-filled, hilarious hour of worship, which she produces and edits and can be viewed at www.karenwcurry.com. She has two poetry books, 2020 Vision, Clarity Through Chaos, about the tumultuous year of 2020, and Poetic and Prophetic, which includes a poem that honestly depicts her joys and pains as a caregiver for her beloved mom. It also includes a poem in tribute to breast cancer survivors. Donna Gills is an extraordinary speaker and trainer called upon to host numerous conferences and seminars in both secular and faith communities, and has been featured on many stages as well as broadcast radio. Donna serves as a senior client relations executive for Capital Caring Health, one of the most experienced nonprofit hospice agencies in the country, with a focus on long-term care, faith-based community organization connection, and outreach and initiatives. She also serves as the associate director for Capital Caring's Center for Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. She has the remarkable ability to transform the most difficult topics into comfortable conversations. Donna continues to trailblaze opportunities in the community to advocate for and support advanced illness care. Ms. Gales is also one of the community co-chairs of Washington, D.C.'s Department of Health's Places of Worship Advisory Board, and she hosts their new talk show, Speak On It. Donna and Reverend Karen, the stage is now yours.
Thank you so much. Cornbread in the oven, mac and cheese browning and bubbling, greens and things adding to the symphony of a sumptuous feast that's calling me to the family table where all who are able come together in prayer, giving thanks just to be there, gathered in the dining room. These days, even through Zoom, giving thanks for those who've gone on, making sure their memories and their love live on. Even those whose bodies or minds don't function like they used to in their own way are really thankful to be able to connect with you. Even if they can't express it to you, caregivers, they appreciate what you do. The holidays are special. They remind me I am blessed.
Blessed? Holidays? Too stressful and painful. I couldn't care less. My days are lonely with a huge piece of my heart is missing. Those things that you're talking about, I don't want to start reminiscing. But I hear, don't worry, it's better this way. Better which part? When my little space is a big broken heart. My loved one is gone, but yours are still here. It's easy for you to be filled with holiday cheer. Me, not so much. My sense of purpose has dwindled away. I wish I could enjoy another great holiday. We used to have so much joy cooking our big family meal, but seeing those empty chairs, do you know how that feels? It's like a dagger that stabs again and again. There's nothing more painful than grief I can't end. Some days are better than others. It's always going to be that way. But I just don't know when I'll have a happy holiday. Don't get me wrong, I am thankful and I am blessed. But the thought of gathering just leaves me depressed. So many emotions and memories that flood my mind. And I'm just trying to take this new normal one day at a time. I know folks mean well by wanting me to get out of this mode. So I keep to myself my true feelings untold. People don't understand how this time of year for me is so sad. I guess it won't really register until they lose a mom or a dad. Loss is never easy, no matter the relation. And people who lack empathy just don't help the situation. Time doesn't heal all wounds, and that's just a fact. I would do anything to get my loved ones back. So please try to forgive me if I'm not able to say that I'm looking forward to this season of happy holidays. All of these emotions, I swear this is just a mess. Like I said, holidays too painful. I couldn't care less.
Well, is it that you don't care enough? Or is it that you care so much? If you could not care less, then there's no place lower your care can go. That means there's room for your care to grow. That means you are free to develop your own flow. When you celebrate the holidays, it doesn't have to be a major show. You might meet up at a sandy beach and forego the Christmas snow. You might start a new tradition. Hey, give it a go. Even though our loved ones' transitions may leave a hole in our heart, the joy they represent, was it ever meant to stop just because we're apart? My mom appreciated the holidays. I will too. My mom spread joy every day. That's what I aim to do.
Well, honestly, I used to love this season, and I don't want to feel like this. I wonder what I could possibly do to bring back my holiday bliss.
But thank you very much, ladies, for that beautiful, beautiful poetic expression. And to answer the question that you left us with, Donna, up next we have Reverend Susan Edmonds and Reverend Dr. Sabrina Sinclair to share with us grief reactions and coping mechanisms. Reverend Susan Edmonds is the creator of TalkEarlyTalkOften.com, an online resource to help families with conversations and planning that can transform the journey of aging until the end. Her work was featured on NBC Nightly News, and she was interviewed in the PBS documentary, Consider the Conversation, a documentary on a taboo subject. She has served as her denomination as a local church pastor and at the judiciary of national levels. She has served the community as a hospice chaplain and a hospice volunteer. Reverend Dr. Sabrina Sinclair is a certified bereavement counselor with Capital Caring Health, serving the Washington, D.C. community. She is also a senior ambassador for Capital Caring Center for Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Reverend Dr. Sinclair is committed to serving the needs of those who are experiencing grief due to loss of a loved one. She has a long history of coordinating and leading community-based grief trainings and workshops with a focus on community and faith-based organizations. She is an experienced pastor with a demonstrated history of working with religious institutions, nonprofit organizations, discipleship, church leadership training, and pastoral counseling. She is a strong community and social service professional and a proud graduate of Virginia Union University. Reverend Dr. Sabrina and Reverend Del Susan, please take the floor.
Thank you. Grief invades and impedes the peace of many of us during the holiday season. So certainly we understand what has just been stated, because grief is that acute pain that accompanies loss. And this is any type of loss. Because grief is a reflection of what we love, it can feel all-encompassing. Grief is normal and a natural response when we suffer a loss. And it doesn't matter what type of loss we have. We get the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, or loss through divorce. There's so many different types of losses we can experience. Grief is not fixable. Grief cannot be rushed.
Dr. Sabrina, we lost your sound.
Line, we can look at the actual physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual reactions individuals may experience. Simply knowing these feelings are normal can help us when we're mourning. Like one, common physical reactions to grief. When you think about the common physical reactions to grief, sometimes our sleeping change, we get weight and appetite changes, tiredness, deep sighing, sometimes feeling physically weak. Sometimes we may get energized, feeling strong, feeling invincible. Sometimes we have muscle tension, pounding heart, headaches, stomach aches. Certain sights and sounds can shake us, especially those that remind us of the loss. And we can have a weakening in our immune system, so we'll find ourselves having increased numbers of colds and infections. So these are just some of the physical reactions to grief. Reverend Susan, what do we do when we have those physical reactions?
That is just certainly a good question. And I know that that grief really puts a strain, an added strain when it comes to holiday seasons. Because so many times what people want to do is kind of one extreme or the other. They want to pretend that everything is fine, and then try to kind of push it down, because no matter what, they're going to get through the holidays and we're going to have a good time and everything's going to be fine. And it comes out in ways that you don't expect, and that's surprising, in that you can have all kinds of challenges and think that you want to attribute it to something that someone else is doing to annoy you, or if only that person had made the recipe that I told them to make, and not realize that a lot of our intense emotions, or being so short-tempered or whatever, can be because we're grieving. And so one of the things to do that's really important is just to try to carve out a little space before you get into the situation. We've come through one of the holidays, we got another set coming up right in front of us. Maybe take a little time beforehand to try to think through what were some of the things that really set you off during Thanksgiving. Maybe even jot down some of those things and try to just take a deep breath and think about, then on the other side, what are some of the things that were really heavy on your heart that you hadn't been able to acknowledge with the family, that you've been racing and spending so much time racing through, trying to push down to get ready for everything that you've not had a chance to deal with. And so maybe just jotting a little note to yourself about what's really weighing you down, some of the sadness and the grief situations that you carry. And then you might be able to begin to identify some of those correlations between those things, and realize that what you're carrying really is heavy and does deserve to be acknowledged.
Thank you, because that speaks to some of those common emotional reactions that many times we don't attest to it being grief. Like agitation, sometimes feeling shaken up so quickly, or anger, a strong emotion of displeasure with others or with an event, and don't understand why all of a sudden we get this anger or anxiety, always feeling nervous, feeling wary, or apathy. Sometimes just, I don't care what happens next, or despair or disbelief, emptiness. And that's a big one. I think you just spoke that emptiness, feeling hopeless, sad, with nothing to give to others. How do we handle those emotional reactions that accompany these physical reactions?
It is so tangled up together. What's interesting, I think, too, is being able to recognize that if we're feeling it and experiencing it and going through it, the likelihood is that other people in our family are also experiencing it and feeling it and going through it. And so sometimes what's happening is the conflicts that are happening have nothing to do with the fact that the turkey was dry. Had nothing to do with the turkey. It is people carrying different levels of emotion and anger and grief, and nobody feeling comfortable to really acknowledge what's happening. And so one of the ways to kind of help everybody is to be the one, maybe to take the leadership in the family and kind of name what you think is going on. You say, you know what? It is really hard thinking about having to face this first Christmas without mama. She's always been there to manage everything. Nobody is going to be able to make those mashed potatoes or sweet potatoes the way mama did. And we're going to be upset. And that's okay. To be able to kind of name it. And then maybe even to plan ahead of time with some of the family about how maybe creating a little family ritual about how you might acknowledge, that loss, and not so much to be able to stay in the grief of the moment, but to, whether it's to go ahead and set a place at the table where there really is an empty chair, and leave that place empty rather than being angry that somebody sat in mama's space. Go ahead and plan to leave it empty, make it there, acknowledge it. Maybe have a time where everybody around the table just says something that was a gift from mama that you're so glad to have received, or even to name a favorite food that you always looked forward to eating, but just create something together that gives a moment for that emotional release that then creates a different level of bonding rather than everybody just trying to push it down and being annoyed with everybody else.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful, because one of the things that I hear a lot is just those common mental reactions to grief. Something we don't even identify as being mental reactions to grief. Like sometimes I hear people saying that they have difficulty in concentrating, or they're continuously thinking about the loss and wanting to know, is this normal? Or difficulty making decisions. Or sometimes the self-esteem gets low, or start looking at others, trying to see if are others responsible for the loss. And another thing is increased or decreased dreams, nightmares, thinking everyone is watching you, or thinking that you're different from everyone else because you have suffered this loss and you're in this all by yourself. And then sometimes even self-destructive thoughts. Some of the mental reactions to grief people are experiencing. How do we handle that for the holiday as well?
Absolutely. And I think that is so important to all that range of reactions that you've named, because all of them are normal, but yet no one person will experience all of them, or in the same sequence, or at the same time. People grieve at different rates. They grieve again according to different timelines. And so to first acknowledge in yourself kind of what's happening and give permission for yourself to to feel those feelings and know that they're normal, but also to be able to give that kind of permission to other people. Like for instance, your dad may have just a hard time acknowledging his sadness, because, he's supposed to be able to handle everything and the head of the family and this and that. And so maybe to write him a little note ahead of time and say, Dad, I know this is going to be a hard Christmas for you. And, I know if you find yourself, a little tear coming to your eye or something, don't worry about it. Don't try to hide it, because it'll be good for the grandkids to know how much you love mama. And, just some kind of little note of encouragement that gives permission to other people to experience what they experience. Plus also resetting the idea that, well, they should be over it by now. There is no timeline to grief. And the other thing is to give permission to yourself and to others to acknowledge that grief can come in waves. You think you're fine, and all of a sudden you smell that pumpkin pie and feel like you're going to break out weeping, because that was the thing that mama always made, the night before. And so, it's just kind of giving space, permission, and allow people to kind of move through it in the way and then the timeline that they need to move through it will really be a big help to the whole family.
That's great, and that's extremely helpful when we think about the grief. And one of the areas that we get pulled on, and we don't realize as much, and you may have seen it with your congregations, is that the spiritual reaction to grief. That's another one of the common reactions to grief that sometimes we overlook, because the people have that sense of loss and emptiness. Sometimes the person who's experiencing this grief can feel abandoned or punished by God. Sometimes they question a reason to go on living, sometimes feeling like you don't belong, or even being angry with God. Is it okay to be angry with God? Or questioning the religious beliefs, and then also feeling spiritually connected to the person who died, or they deal with being spiritually connected to God, or needing to receive forgiveness, and not understanding why they need to be forgiven, or do I need to be forgiven, or what does this whole thing look like? Should I have done more? Is this my fault? Or finding hope in prayer and spiritual beliefs, or even finding purpose in life. Many times people don't realize that when they're having all these emotions that is going on, all these reactions to their grief, the spiritual reactions, they'll tend to hide it because they don't know if it's normal. Is it normal to feel like this?
Absolutely normal. And that's the hard thing, is that sometimes we mistake normal, the idea of being normal, in that everybody does it the same. And that those two things are not interchangeable. It can be very, very normal and look entirely different from the way your sister is handling it, or entirely different from the way that your children are handling it. Grieving is universal. It's all normal, but the way that we can experience it, it can be very different. And I think a couple of things come to mind in terms of resources to deal with that, spiritual resources. One is just to take some time to be honest about what's going on, and maybe write a letter to God. Say, God, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what you were thinking. And, you can be like, whoa, I can't be saying all that to God. It's like, well, if you look at the actual stories in the Bible, you're going to find a whole lot of examples of the wrestling that happened with God, the questioning, the demanding that happened with God about those people that from those people that we look up to most as our biblical heroes. The Psalms, for instance, are all about telling the truth about what's going on, and that idea of lament and wrestling with God about what's going on. And that's important, to create that space, whether it's in a letter, whether it's reading the Psalms, but something that is honest about what's going on.
But what happens in the Psalms, for instance, is that there's an alternating in the Psalms between the lament and the praise. And so the other piece of the spiritual strength we can get is for praising God, not for what happened, but praising God for the gift of that person in your life. And to be able to create some time during the holidays together for family members to share stories about the loved one. Can be funny stories about, oh, remember when this happened, remember when that happened, and going back, and by capturing those moments and those stories and sharing those, you're giving thanks to God for that incredible gift that you got. Feeling that person's presence again strongly in the midst of the family, and really kind of bringing together a new kind of bonding, even in their absence, being able to feel their presence very much in your midst.
Thank you. It kind of reminds me of those 9 things to remember about grief. 9 things that we remember is 1, you cannot hurry grief. 2, do your best not to compare yourself with others or criticize yourself about where you should be in the grieving process. Thirdly, honor your instincts and own unique needs as to what best supports your healing. 4, to heal from loss does not mean to get over it or pretend it never happened. 5, be gentle with yourself and your expectations. 6, welcome all feelings. There is not a right or wrong when it comes to our feelings. 7, everyone's story is different, but support from someone who has experienced something similar is so valuable. 8, it is always okay to slow down, rest, and let someone know what you need. And then 9, with traumatic grief, everyone's beliefs and views are shaken. Allow others to question, explore, or rely on their own personal beliefs without giving advice, and feel free to share your own understanding.
Those are just so important to kind of be able to embrace all of those things. Really will make a huge difference, I think, in terms of the experience of the holidays. In just a little bit, I'd love to share a resource that may help us kind of pull together some of those ideas that both of us have just shared. But I think we have Alexandra Drain, who's going to share with us just another way of looking at our experience during the holidays that'll make a real difference for family caregivers.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Dr. Sinclair and Reverend Dale Susan Edmonds. Thank you so much for sharing. And now that we're grounded in grief reactions and coping mechanisms, we want to learn a little bit more about overall caregiver intensity. And most importantly, acknowledging caregiving is intense and you're not alone. To share those details, we are honored to have Ms. Alexandra Drain. Alexandra is the co-founder and CEO of Archangels, which is all about reframing how unpaid caregivers are seen, honored, and supported using a combination of data and stories, and working across public and private channels. She is a big believer that communities are the front line of health, that caregivers are our country's greatest asset, and that we need to expand the definition of health to include life. Wing walking is her favorite pastime, and you can ask her about that if there's time later. Thanks so much, and Alex, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I'm sitting here listening so hard to everything and applying all of it to just the experiences of the last week and really the last 6 months. We lost my mom-in-law in March, and it's extraordinary thinking about grief, listening to all this wisdom about grief, and obviously the poetic expression in the beginning was so beautiful. I'm so glad this is recorded because I can't wait to share it with a bunch of loved ones on this side as well. So I'm going to cover some data about if grief is what we're feeling sometimes before we lose somebody, but clearly after, there's a lot of stress and intensity as unpaid caregivers, as those who are caring for or looking out for a loved one or a friend or a family member or a coworker or a neighbor. That impacts how we are surviving and what strength and resiliency we bring into that, to that ability to survive grief as well. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to cover a lot, but all along that same theme that we were talking about before, which is how do we as individuals, how do we really work through this notion of intensity, and how do we support each other through what being an unpaid caregiver is and the impact it has on its body. So let me start by just saying everything that we're going to share today, all the data. Thank you for describing, Altonia, as always so beautifully, what our goal is and what we cover today. But it really comes under this broader definition of having learned the hard way over the past 25 years that the definition of health that many employers and health plans and health systems and even communities have is this narrow idea that health is your diabetes or your cardiovascular disease. And what we learned over the years is that's a very limited definition. Health is really how you feel when you have caregiver stress, financial stress, relationship stress, workplace stress. And unfortunately, if you're a caregiver, you're definitely going to have those other three things as well. So how do we broaden that definition of health to include life? Because when life goes wrong, health goes wrong. So I want to share some data that is going to go way back, like all the way back before COVID started, which we would think is forever ago, but is in fact just as recently as early 2020, as you guys know all too well. So this was a study published by the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. And it pegged the number of caregivers in the US before COVID as 53 million, which is about 21% of all adults in the US. And I remember when the study came out, we all thought, oh my gosh, it's a huge percentage of adults. We would never have thought it was that much. Well, not only are there a lot of us, but we don't always look like what people might expect when they're thinking of an unpaid caregiver. They usually think of a woman who's 50, who's caring for her mom, which is true. But there's a lot of others in that role as well. For example, 45% of unpaid caregivers before COVID were men. A full 1 in 4 were millennial, and 1 in 5 were actually Gen Z. So just opening up this process for each of us as we think about who are these unpaid caregivers and how do we support them, we have to broaden our definition of who they are in the first place. And if before COVID, there were 21% of adults in the US playing this role, boy, we can tell you the impact on health and the percentage of us in this role has really changed as of COVID. So how much has it changed? Well, it's actually doubled. So as of COVID, this was a study that we published with the CDC back in June of this past summer. It's now 43% of adults in the US are in this role. And these studies that we were part of, there are actually 4 of them over the last year, looked at the impact of being a COVID on being a caregiver and on your mental health, and sort of the cumulative effects of these things building on each other. And I want to dig in a little bit. So that 43% of adults who are now serving in this role, 70%, when we talk about this cumulative impact on mental health, 70% of those unpaid caregivers are now experiencing at least one mental health impact. So that's anxiety or depression or suicidal ideation. And this study, when it came out, got a lot of attention in the press. And I think it got a lot of attention in the press because we're talking about you're not alone. And it really sort of formalized, this is very normal, right? To be feeling anxiety or depression or stress or even suicidal thoughts. This is normal for unpaid caregivers. And that's really important for people to know you're not alone, which I'm so grateful to each of you guys for having shared, because listening to you, it makes me again feel more normal in my own feelings along this. But there's a whole other population. So there's individuals who are caring as a parent or guardian for someone or people who are under 18. And then there are individuals who are caring for somebody, a neighbor, a loved one, a family member, a friend, a brother, a sister, a partner, who are over 18. But then there's this other group that we're going to call sandwich generation caregivers, or multi-sandwich generation, or as some of us like to call it, club sandwich, right? Or club sandwich, because you're getting it really from all sides. And a full 23% of adults right now in the US are in this role. And 85% of any of us that are serving as a sandwich generation caregiver are experiencing at least one of those mental health impacts. But we want to take it a step further. Let's really dig in around this notion of suicidal ideation. And I think each of you in your own way talked about, especially when we talked about grief, that some of these ultimate manifestations of grief can invoke in us really, 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 really hard feelings, really hard feelings. And this study that was published really dug in on, okay, this notion of suicidal ideation. And let's talk about suicidal ideation with a different definition. It's serious thoughts of suicide, specifically in the last 30 days. That's the clinical definition of suicidal ideation. So let's just think of it as suicidal thoughts, thinking about taking your own life. So I'm going to divide the United States into four populations right now. One population we'll think of as the baseline. They're not serving in any role as a caregiver at all, right? Not any role in the least. And that baseline, 4.5% of that population has thought about suicide in the last 30 days. Okay, well, what if you're serving in the role, but only as a parent or guardian? That number instantaneously doubles. Now it's 9% of those individuals have thought about suicide in the past month. Really sobering numbers. But what if you're serving in the role, but only for someone who's over 18 or people who are over 18? It's 10%. What if you're that sandwich generation caregiver? So you're that individual who's caring for kids, maybe a child with disabilities, at the same time that you're caring for someone or people who are over 18. What percentage of that population has had suicidal thoughts in the last 30 days? Take a second so you can write it down. Make your own guess what it might be. We hear people sometimes say 17%, 20%, could it be 25%? It's actually 52%. So 52% of this population has thought about suicide in the last 3 days. 52% of sandwich generation caregiving adults are having these serious suicidal thoughts. And the part about that, if we come back to that normal theme, I think anyone who's been in this role, who's experienced it, they're not surprised to hear that for themselves. Often they're so surprised to hear that it's happening for so many other people. And that in and of itself, that the notion that you're not alone in it, is itself support, right? Is itself a way of helping someone get through it. So we think about caregiving intensity. That's the term we use. As you're in the green, you're in the yellow, or you're in the red. And the red is when you have that highest level of intensity. And we're talking about the holidays. And we know the holidays intensify everything. Before COVID, 8% of adults who are caregivers were in the red. As of COVID, that jumped to 26%. So almost a 3 times increase in terms of the number of adults who are in this role. What happens when you're in the red? What happens when you have high caregiver intensity? What happens to caregivers in general? Well, we self-medicate, right? We cope with our stress by drinking. Specifically, this study looks at drinking or using drugs to cope with caregiver stress. And what we can tell you is unpaid caregivers, as of COVID, were increasing their use of substances to cope at 5 times the rate of the rest of the population. And I will be the first to admit, I absolutely, on those nights where I have the luxury of being able to maybe have an extra glass of wine or so, I do that to help deal with the stress, to help think about other things, to help ignore during the holidays the things that are making me insane. But sometimes we don't have that luxury, right? Because we got to get up in the middle of the night, administer a medication, make sure someone's turning over. We're listening hard all the time to be sure we hear a loved one if they get out of bed and if they're a wanderer. Well, then how do we cope? Well, in that situation, up to 50% of unpaid caregivers, they cope through food. And I'll also admit, sometimes I cope with both. That really works too. Then there's another thing that we do, right? Which is we delay care. So if you're an unpaid caregiver, you're so worried about the care of somebody else that you sometimes ignore your own care. And as of COVID, that's happening even more. So unpaid caregivers delaying or avoiding medical care, urgent or emergency care at 5 times the rate of the rest of the population, 1.5 times the rate from a routine care perspective. So the Caregiver Intensity Index, and Reverend Dale, Susan's going to distribute some resources after. We're happy to distribute to people as well. This looks at how do you measure that level of intensity on your body? How do we sort of pinpoint the things that are driving that intensity? So the intensity index, you can think of it as like a 2-minute quiz. It validates that reality you have. It's really important. Like it validates it. Like you're not crazy that you feel this way. You are in the red, or you're in the yellow, hopefully, or even the green. And then it talks about the top 4 factors that are driving it, the drivers that make things more intense and the buffers that make things better, that sort of relieve that pressure or that intensity. And then it serves as a mechanism to crosswalk caregivers over to resources that exist right now in your community that you might not have known about, that are available for free, that you can access. You know, it's described sort of like a 2-minute therapy session. So one person described it as a Cosmo quiz. And often you start it and think it's not about you, but in the end you realize that it is, and you're actually in the red. So one of the things that's important in this whole conversation, we keep using the term caregiver, but as you guys know all too well, at least 50% of unpaid caregivers, they don't know what that term means. And in fact, if you say to them, okay, you're not a caregiver, but you just described that your mom is living with you, or you visit your dad every day, or you're making sure your neighbor gets food to eat and their fridge is filled, what are you? The things that you hear back are really, really beautiful. People will say, well, I'm not a caregiver, I'm just, so funny, how can you use the word just ever before these beautiful terms? A decent human being, a God-fearing person, a good friend, right? Example after example of sort of the love and honor and dignity and respect that individuals have when they talk about the role that they're playing, as at the same time sort of undermining the importance of that role or seeing themselves in it. So you get the score in this particular circumstance. I was in the red when I took it. And then here are the two things on the left. These are the drivers making things more intense for me at that time, wondering if I was doing it right, feeling manipulated or resentful. But there's also things that are making it better, right? Things that are relieving that intensity, especially during the holidays, for example, feeling like you have someone in your corner or feeling a sense of purpose. So as we're thinking about, I'm thinking about the title, right? The holidays are here, who cares? Practical ways caregivers can survive the holidays. Well, one is, as we're thinking about what not to feel alone in, we can tell you that if you're an unpaid caregiver, you have 3 times the risk of significant mental health impact, feeling badly, anxiety, or depression, if you are having caregiving related family disagreements or resentment about caregiving responsibilities. I really don't know anyone who's in this role who's not. You've got 2 times the risk if you feel underprepared, not having as much personal freedom as you would like, or having had to cut down on expenses during caregiving. I want to add another quick data point and an anecdote around it, which is if you're in the red, as of COVID, 1 in 2 caregivers, 53% of caregivers in the red are worried that their primary relationship is actually going to end due to caregiving. Could be divorce, a breakup, whatever it might be. And I was reflecting, listening to you guys tell your stories and about the holidays in particular, about my honey and I'm madly in love with my man. We had a massive argument. We had a lot of people staying in our house over the holidays, lots of intensity, grieving going on from the loss from earlier this year, and maybe not coping with it well. I myself was really, really, really no fun on Saturday night. I sort of pinpointed my anger on my honey, and said how mad I was with him. And he said he had the presence of mind because he's used to this language now. He said, "You're really not cranky with me, Alex." He said, "You're just in the red. You're in the red as a caregiver." And I was like, "I am not in the red, and don't minimize my anger. I'm actually really angry, and I'm angry at you." And he said, I love you, and I'm not going to get mad at you back. I think you're just literally in the red. And part of why it's important to acknowledge these feelings that come up in us and to name them, right, is then that helped him not be mad at me back, helped de-escalate everything, and actually helped me eventually think, you know what, he's right. I am just stressed about all these things that are going on and the added pressure of the holidays. And oh my gosh, how terrible of me, because he's grieving right now because this is our first Thanksgiving without his mom, right? So being able to name the sources of the stress, and instead of by accident thinking I'm mad at my partner, maybe you're just mad at the situation. Maybe this is just caregiver intensity that's happening. And if you could name it, then you do a better job. I personally could hopefully do a better job, not mistakenly putting it on somebody else. So these are the things that can be hard. There's a lot of things that's beautiful about being a caregiver. As you guys know, there are things that reduce our intensity. We call these things buffers, and the best ones are free. The best buffer in all the land is just knowing you're not alone in it, right? That there are other people who are going through this at the same time. And if you know that there are resources that exist to support you, even if you don't access them, 70% reduction in stress. And caregivers who have greater support, right, lower odds of experiencing any adverse mental health symptoms at all. So the term that we use is a red phone. If you're in the red, you need a red phone. Who's that person that you're going to call that you can, for me, I sometimes need 60 seconds to just say lots of hard things like to a best friend, right, about why I'm so cranky and that I don't have time to talk anymore. I just hang up. But that's my red phone. Everybody during the holidays, who's your red phone? Tell your red phone, I'm going to call you, maybe be super cranky, but it's not at you. I'm just blowing off steam. And then there's resources that exist to support you. You can look at them at Archangels. You can look at them, Reverend Dale Susan's going to share more. There are resources in your community that you can find. If you go to archangels.me, you'll find a lot of them. And I want to share one last story, which is sometimes the resource is just being part of a support group. It's finding people who are going through something like you. And I got a chance to do that. I was part of a listening session that some of the folks on this call, on these so far today, were part of. And this was part of the work that we were doing with Ward 7. And I listened to all these beautiful faith-based leaders really ministering to their parishioners, to the folks who'd come to talk about their caregiving intensity. And there were gorgeous stories shared. And the thing that was so pretty about it is as people were sharing the intensity that they were experiencing, often because of their family and stress related to their family, or lack of support, lack of anybody that they thought would support them, supporting them. The stories that did come up over and over and over again was the story of their faith-based community being there and really pulling for them and showing up at their house and showing up to provide respite for them. And I got off that listening session and I went running into the room where my honey was. And I said, we are completely getting religious and we are joining a church. We are starting this right now because in the event that we're not feeling supported by our family, we need that community. And so as each of us are thinking about who is our red phone's an individual, our red phone can be a resource, our red phone can be the community that we have naturally or that we build. So just deeply grateful to have a chance to share that with each of you. And I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it back to you, the gorgeous Altonia. Thank you for letting me share that data. I hope I did it in my allotted time. And I know that was a lot of data that we went through really quickly. And now you're gone.
Altonia, you're up. I saw she just came back.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing that great information regarding caregiver intensity and all the phenomenal statistics and ways we can cope, and the drivers and the buffers and things of that nature, and just knowing that it's normal and we're not alone in that space. Next, we're going to go back to Reverend Susan to share those resources she mentioned earlier with the group. So Reverend Susan, you're back on.
Whoa, thank you. There's just been so much great information that everybody has shared today. And so what I think is really important is for everybody to know that no matter how fast you were trying to take notes, you wouldn't be able to get it all. And so everybody has pulled together that's been on the resource panel today to make sure that you've got some opportunities to really dig deeper into everything that we were talking about. So there's going to be a set of gifts that we have created for everybody that's going to be part of the call tonight or in the future. If you could type your name into the chat and your email address, you're going to get a packet of resources that includes some of the links that Alexandra Drain shared from Archangels about how you can, where you can go to get your own intensity score. And really what that means is get a realistic, objective look of how you're really doing, rather than it's like, no, I'm fine. Get a measure, take a few minutes, take that test, and you can get kind of an objective score of how your stress level is, and know, get a better sense of what you might be able to reach for as far as reaching out to get some additional support and some additional help. Another opportunity that we have, hang on just one second, let me pull the right resource here. Another opportunity that we have is to have a booklet that can be made available to you all. And if I can pull up the right one, that would be very helpful. There we go. A booklet that's available that contains a lot of the items that we were in conversation about earlier. The idea of navigating the holidays while you're grieving, while you're caring, and how, what are some things that you might be able to do to make that time a little earlier. This is a resource guide that you can have. Not that it's not like a book that you have to sit down and read, but it's got just some quick tips that you might look through, an idea of how you can use this. Some worksheets, not in terms of a course or something like that, but some of the ideas that we talked about and mentioned earlier, to look at how you might plan for grieving and the holidays, planning to walk through holiday grief and sadness together as a family. Some ideas about how you might create some of those acknowledgements, maybe at the meal, how you might prep children for the holidays with grandparents that are aging, or there's a section in there as well about children in grieving and how some of that might get acted out. Being able to look at family conflict differently and see some of those grief stresses in the middle of it and how to offset some of that. And maybe even in this other section about resetting your expectations rather than thinking everything has to be perfect, taking some time to kind of look through what could be different. Who could I share some of the excuse me, some of the rituals, some of the preparation, spread it out so that more of us can participate and there's not so much burden on yourself to try to get everything done yourself and kind of spread it over the family. Another item just is some of the ideas about how you might give thanks for the elders that have been in your midst, who you may have lost, and interviewing and capturing some of those stories so that they're written down and shared with the family, or maybe even some of the stories about some of the objects, you know, that quilt that grandma that quilted, and being able to tell the stories about how she loved quilting and what that meant to her, and tell the stories about the family quilt that you all still have as a memory of her. Anyway, all of these items, as well as opportunities, like I said, to participate in the resources that Alexandra shared, is just so important, because what's most important is to realize not only is it normal, not only is it you're not alone, but it's essential that you reach out and ask for help. You know, nobody's expecting you to carry this all on your shoulders, to do it all alone, to make it look like everything is perfect and nothing is phasing you. That's the worst thing that can happen, because it just builds and builds and builds until you either explode or break down. And we don't want either of those things to happen for you. So please reach out for one of these resources. Reach out to anybody that's been a part of the panel, but also feel free to reach back to your own faith community. Reach out and have a conversation with your pastor, because he or she may not be aware of the kind of stresses that you're feeling, and they very well might not be aware of other members of the congregation that are feeling the same thing. They may want to do a survey of the congregation and find other ways that there could be a mutual support group created right within your own conversation, or perhaps reaching back like to Capital Caring or other groups that have ongoing grief support groups that you can also be a part of. It's so important to recognize you're not alone, and that it is essential and incredibly important to be able to reach out for the help that's available all around you. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and for being a part of this opportunity and allowing us to share these resources with you this evening. Antonia?
Thank you so much, Reverend Del Susan, and for the resources and things that you shared. Please, if you haven't and you like the information, put your information in the chat and we'll get that to you. Next up, we're going to have another poetic expression by Donna Gills.
Well, after this conversation, I have changed. As you can tell, I have lots of resources here. I feel different things. That empty space is gone. I feel so refreshed after this conversation. I have all of these great tips and loads of new information. I learned plenty of ways to reshape my current situation. My hurt has been my focus, and it really shouldn't be. Though the loss has not been easy, there's so much more to see. Providing care is such an honor, and I was blessed to hold that space. I have wonderful, fond memories that cannot be replaced. No matter the day or the hour, I can reflect with compassion and grace, reminded of all the amazing moments and memories that can fill my empty space. I still have so much love to offer that was being veiled and muffled by grief. But as I listened to all of this helpful information today, I sat in disbelief. I know now things can be different, though changes take time to manifest. But I will incorporate all of these things so that I can move in a new direction and my holiday season can be its best. I am so thankful for each and every one of you who have decided to commit to this process of getting new information, because unfortunately, we have a tendency to shun new information when we think we know what we're dealing with. And in a new role as a caregiver myself, although my mom has been intermittently sick over the years, it has changed most recently. And as a caregiver currently, we know that there are many, many stresses, as many of our panelists has already shared. There are many situations that cause us to have emotions, stresses, all kinds of things that impact our overall health. And as a caregiver myself, I certainly want to just engage my fellow panelists and just share more information with you from a personal perspective, because a lot of times people hear what you say, but they also want to feel what you know. And I am a caregiver with my family. My mother is currently dealing with end-stage renal disease as well as end-stage heart failure. And as you know, we just had a major celebration of such this week. And so, well, last week, and it's been very interesting. Alex shared with us about intensity scores, and I can share with you personally, my intensity score was yellow in October. It was red last week. And that is just real time updates, because last week was difficult. It was difficult because as a person who has their own life and their own responsibilities, we still have that component of commitment to caregiving. Although my mother has 7 children, I am one of them, and I share in that caregiving role with all of my siblings. We all share in the process, and we all bring to her caregiving experience who we are as individuals. I love to cook. It's my love language. That's what I do. It's always been that way. I got that from my mother. My mother loves to cook, but in her current situation, she's not able to do those things. And even though I'm currently in a caregiving situation for her, it does impact us when we're all gathered, because I do think about, oh, I remember when mom would do this and do that. And although I do make lots of things well, and she really enjoys my food, I don't make things the way that she does. And I miss those things. And so when we talk about grief and loss, it's not always about the person that's passed away. My mom is sick, and she is not going to recover. She's not getting better. But while she's here, we're able to enjoy. And sometimes as caregivers, we get focused on the wrong things. And as a personal testimony in this space, I just want to share with those who are caregivers to be focused on the right things. You know, I asked my family, are we cooking? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? Nobody responded. I said, okay, great. Because I cook big dinners every other Sunday anyway. I'm like, oh, great, I get to rest. And then my family called me. Well, I will say specifically, my mother called me and said she wanted to make sure that I was cooking a couple of days before Thanksgiving. That's not how we do things. So it intensified my stress, because I didn't really prepare to cook, because I thought we weren't doing that. I thought we were taking a break and just resting and just enjoying company with pizza. That was my suggestion. They didn't want that. So with that came a lot of pressure all of a sudden, because in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, what if this is my mother's last Thanksgiving and she wanted me to cook and I didn't? And immediately I just started crying. I was like, oh my God, I cannot let that happen. But I was exhausted. I really didn't want to cook. But I said, you know, I thought about the fact that this is a time that I get to cherish right now. I don't know if she'll be here next Thanksgiving. I don't know if she'll be here next week. I don't know if I'll be here next week. Our lives are changing in such ways that we have to be cognizant of the now. And as a caregiver, we can get confused in that. We can forget the now because there's so much responsibility packed into the now. But with that, we have to be grateful for the ability in the now to do all the things that we do. We just have to balance them and do them better so that we have health in our own situation, so that we have support, so that we have knowledge and understanding and resources and tools that we can use to be better, not just better for ourselves, but better for those that we're caring for. Because as we intersect with others, if we're not the best we can be for ourselves, we are not the best we can be for anyone else. And so I just want to open the conversation with my fellow panelists. You all can join us back on the floor and just, give Altanya back the floor after having shared my personal testimony. I want everyone to have an opportunity to just talk about real-time caregiving, because this is our last day of National Family Caregiver Month, and we're celebrating, and it is also National Hospice and Palliative Care Month, as well as Alzheimer's Awareness Month. There's a lot of things to celebrate this month, but we certainly want to bring the focus in on all of us who are doing so much in different spaces. So I'll give it back to you, Altanya.
Well, thank you so very much, Donna, for first of all, the poetic expression and bringing it all together and summarizing it in such a way. And then just ultimately for your testimony and sharing your real life, current, experience. And I was just, it was powerful. So thank you for sharing that. So with that being said, for those that have joined us, are there any questions that you may have? And if so, you may put them in the Q&A box and we can all see them, or even in the chat section here. So I'll give us a little bit of time. Oh, can y'all hear me? Okay. So I'll give us a little bit of time to think about questions. And to my panelists, while we wait, do any of you have any stories or testimonies to share regarding this past holiday that we've had, or just others in the past, or looking ahead to the holidays at the end of the year, from your own personal experience or friends or family that you've, any stories or testimony to share while we wait for questions to come in?
I do have one. And one of the things that, as was just touched, Donna just touched on, is when the holiday comes, to carve out that space to remember your loved one. Not many times we're looking at one another and not really talking about our loved one in a meaningful way that brings healing, because everyone is trying to keep the other one from hurting. But that's one of the things I found with because my mother-in-law passed, and Thanksgiving was always a big day for her, and everyone, no matter where you went, you always ended up at her home. That was the last place you went to, because that's when you visit all the other in-laws, then you come to her house and you just conclude there. And so when we got together, it was a little awkward. It was almost like a silence. Nobody was really talking about that tradition that we had. And so I talked to my husband about it, and I said, we're going to have to be more intentional for the next holiday, that we're not missing the essence of her presence. And so that's one thing I would encourage, is to find meaningful ways to be able to still talk about your loved one and bring them in the room. Is so helpful. So we're going to be more conscientious about that for the Christmas holiday, because that was another day that at the end, you go visit everyone else and you end up at her house. And so when we come together, I'm going to look at some new ritual that we're going to start to really bring her in the room in a big way, a big celebratory way.
Wow, Sabrina. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say, one of the things that we did before we lost my mom-in-law was we made a playlist of music that had been really important to her when she was younger. And every night, we knew we had not a lot of time. And every night she was living with us, we had a dance party. We would play that music, we'd dance around, we would take videos, we would record it, ridiculous videos, but they were so fun. And so my dad is older, he's 81, and he was with us at Thanksgiving. And we thought back to that, and we created a playlist of songs from when he was younger, and all danced around and recorded it. And I was thinking in my head that night, I suddenly linked the two. I was like, we're learning to build the now, to be intentional in this moment, so that when we look back later, I can say, okay, we did our best. We really did our best with Antonio's mom, because we really don't know. I mean, Donna, Karen, you guys said so beautifully, like, we have no idea what's coming tomorrow, none. And to be able to think to myself, every second I took my dad to the airport yesterday, and I took a picture of him as he was walking away. And I thought, I don't know, maybe that's my last picture. I'm taking that last picture, and I'm going to cherish it because I know I'm beaming love on him, but doing everything we can. And then the only other point I'll make really, really quickly is unpaid caregivers do a terrible job asking for help. And Reverend Dale, Susan, you and I have talked about this. And so unpaid caregivers, please ask for help. If you don't, then any of us who are in a role to be an outer circle, be that outer circle, and don't act like, just help, insert yourself, fill a fridge, go and sit with somebody for an hour to give an unpaid caregiver an hour break. Holidays are a time when you don't get much break. And if you can insert yourself into someone's situation, just be of service. That I think is a real gift for unpaid caregivers.
Yeah, I want to build on that just a second too, because a lot of times the people that kind of take the major role as the caregiver, the lead unpaid caregiver, you have this idea in your head about how things have to be, and nobody else can do it the way you do it, and has to be perfect, it has to be just right. Guess what? If somebody else does it wrong, the world won't fall apart. And so the way you're going to get a little bit of a break is to let somebody else get the practice, let somebody else make the whatever dish it is, or run the errand, or fold the laundry, or do it. It's not going to be the way you would do it, but it gives you a bit of a break. You need the break, take the help, let them do it wrong, but it'll still get done without you.
And Reverend Dale, Susan, I want to, on the other side of that, right? On the other side of that, I'm smiling because I think about my grandmother. And she, as the person being cared for, she was very specific about who she wanted to care for her as my mom. It's like, no, Barbara does it this way, Barbara this, Barbara that. I would often relieve my mom and support her, and she could have a break and things of that nature. And my grandmother was like, no, don't go that way. Go, every little thing. So I had to have a good, very respectful, talk with my grandma. I say, Grandma, because I'm doing it different doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. It's just different than my mom. So just give me a chance. And she did. I had to let her know, I'm not doing it wrong. I'm not hurting you. It's just not the way my mom did it, but the outcome is still there. You're still safe, healthy, everything. And so she finally says, oh, okay, well, all right. And then, so with that being said, other people were more open to helping care for my grandma, because she did loosen up a little bit, and understanding that people are doing it different doesn't mean they're doing it wrong or improper. But anyway, I want to share that story as a other side of that, as the actual person receiving the care. So
It's so true. It's so true. And I think those things are things to remember, because we have to recognize and acknowledge that the person receiving the care oftentimes does not want to need to be cared for in those ways. And so those opportunities that we have to serve them don't always feel like service to them. Sometimes it feels very, very guilt-ridden for them. They don't want you to be burdened with taking care of them. My mother has said that a million times, and none of us feel burdened per se. I won't say that sometimes you're like, that's normal. That's a human reaction. And I think when we try to extract the humanity from what we do to try to be these super people, that's where we start to fall apart. Because like Reverend Dale Susan said, we have to reach out for the help. We have to ask for it. And when someone tries to give it to us, we have to not reject it. We have to accept it and say, okay, all right, you know what? Okay, fine. And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to accept the help, because you want the person you're caring for to accept your help. So we don't even conceptualize the entire continuum. That person doesn't want to be a burden. You don't want to put pressure on somebody else to do it. It's a cycle that we have to break with the compassion that we have in all of our hearts and the understanding that we gather, and let the person know, and all of your fellow caregivers in that situation know, that we're in this together. No one has to be a martyr. No one has to be a superhero. No one has to, have their cape on 24/7. We get together, we support each other, we do this together, and everybody brings their best self to the table, bring everything that you are to that experience. And it's amazing. It's when you're trying to be somebody that you aren't in that situation that things feel very burdensome. Like I said, initially, I am the one that cooks. My mother says that my food is the best. A friend of mine asked her the other day, like, which one of your children cook the best? She said, my nickname is Punky. She says, Punky, and then Amp, that's my oldest brother. It's true. For all of my siblings that will watch this, it is true. So that's why my mother called me and said, I want to make sure that you are cooking. And I was like in the bed. This was like 10 o'clock at night on Sunday. I was like, are you kidding me? But I digress. The thing is, that's who I am in this situation. I'm not going to ask my brother, who is transport and this and that, to break what he does to do what I do when I do what I do. When we bring ourselves to the situation, any situation, caregiving or anything else, when we bring our entire selves to it, it works out so well.
Awesome. I wanted to go back to something that Altania mentioned, and you didn't use this word, but that's what I was hearing when you talked about what you did. And you were a change agent without really intending to be so and meaning to be so. And sometimes it works, sometimes not. Donna, you couldn't make that change there and kind of say, well, bro, you do it. But in this case with Altania, she was able to do that and be that and push through some of the discomfort that will come with change. And so even for you, Donna, one of these years, it may be that you'll say, all right, well, I'm going to work with my brother and we're going to do it together so we can, and she may say, well, I don't want him, I want it all you. I know. And then whatever, right? Because in the end, when the food is there and the people are hungry, hungry people eat. So, and then when you don't emphasize who made what, so even as because this is all real for us, right? We live this, we're walking through this. And so, but again, sometimes being that change agent means you're going to have to get the fussing, you're going to, like Altania did, and you're going to have to be the one to just kind of graciously kind of introduce the shift that, hey, I'm going to help sometimes. I know you would prefer so-and-so to do it, but I'm learning too. And thank you so much for helping me learn, and maybe that kind of whole thing. So I just wanted to share that piece. And in my case, my mom is with the Lord now, but I was her caregiver off and on for a while she went through various health challenges. She overcame and beat breast cancer, which I'm thankful for that, but that was a struggle and a challenge. And I was there all the way for that. And then when she had a number of other ailments and other things unrelated to that, but later in life, there was a lot there. And the one thing I just wanted to say from that journey, particularly when she passed, well, two things real quick. One is that when we are caregivers, we're actually grieving even then. The grief does not only happen if and when the person passes on, we're grieving the loss of who we used to know. The way they used to be, the things they could do. We're grieving the pain of seeing our loved one decline and change or be limited in whatever way, even if they're a young person who may have had an accident or something has happened and now they are not the way they were. So there's this kind of state of grief. And I embraced that, to be honest. There were times, and I really haven't had another forum to really share this, but there are times I cried while my mother was still alive. I just cried with the tears of grief and knowing that the chances of her being like she was just was not the case, and that where we were headed, at some point it would be that separation. And I let myself do that. I gave myself permission to do that. And it actually helped me enjoy her more for the time that I did have. And I took pictures and videos, Alexandria. I did it. And she enjoyed it. She cut up along with it. And look, I didn't realize till I captured it that she actually did poetry. I thought I got all my poetry from my father, but she bust a rhyme in the grocery store and I caught the tail end of it on camera and I shared it in her homegoing celebration. The church didn't even know. Like, what, Miss Dorothy rhyming? And she did, and it was so awesome. So, that leads me to the last quick point, and that's joy. I had to choose, as we all do, when the time came that my mom actually did pass. I had to choose whether I was going to let pain be the place that I stayed, because I certainly felt it. There was no mistaking that, or whether I was going to embrace the joy that she gave me and let her memories trigger joy or trigger pain. And I really literally felt the choice being laid before me. And I want to say that because we sometimes don't know and think that we have a choice. We sometimes think honoring the loved one is to remain in grief, is to remain in sackcloth and ashes, and that's respecting their memory and respecting their life. But what that means is we're not living, because then we're sad with their birthday, sad with their death day, sad with their favorite holiday, sad on Valentine's Day, sad at Easter. Then when are we living and we're still here? And what are we taking from what they gave us to live? You know, every year there's going to be something different at that family gathering table. There will be someone emptying the chair, and there'll be someone new filling the chair. That is the cycle of life. And when we can embrace that, then we can have joy. So now when I see purple, which was my mom's favorite color, and she thought if she saw purple, it was for her, period. Anything purple is for her. I can now laugh and get excited instead of, oh, purple. And, you know, I'm excited and I say, go ahead, Mom. You sure would think that was for you if you were here, and I can laugh and enjoy. So I encourage people, feel the grief. The grief is real. Face it, cry, do all of those things, but know that we don't want to have grief in the driver's seat. It may be along for the ride for a while, but I chose not to have it in the driver's seat so that I could maintain that joy that my mom had when she was here, and now that I have now that she's gone on.
Amen.
I want to thank everyone for their time and their interest in this program, and we certainly hope that you'll be able to share it with your loved ones. We are just starting this holiday season, but we recognize through this process that every day is a day of celebration. So let us use this resource and move forward in a different way. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.